Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panelists here today for your very insightful comments and perspectives. I had questions about the venture capital portion, but you've, Mr. Biddle, done a very good job of explaining the role that organizations like yourself play in not only the grant participants in the SBIR program, but I think in the entrepreneurial community in our country. And I would say that that's an important role given all of the talk around this campus about stimulating the economy. And since 60% of American citizens get their paycheck from a small business, it seems that this committee and our work and the folks that we look out for are important always, but especially now as we try and stimulate the economy. And so I think programs like SBR are, again, always justified, but I think especially so. That's why I want to make sure that the reauthorization and the language in here is exactly what needs to happen. And there was some discussion about needing to increase the grants. I believe in that. It's a portion of the language that I've brought forward. And in the draft form that we have now, the Phase 1 grants would increase from $100,000 to $250,000, and then the Phase 2 grants would go up to $2 million. And I just want to give each one of you the opportunity that wish to comment on that and whether or not you think those are sufficient levels, or if you think another figure or a different level. Obviously, you know, the sky is the limit, but realistically, what do you think are appropriate amounts? Given there's been quite a lapse in updating these figures since 2000, obviously time value of money has some effect on what $100,000 would get you in terms of research and development. So, Mr. Biddle?
I don't think the size of the program needs to be increased. I think the program can be made more effective. I think that increasing the grant size is important to make the grants worth the effort. Because what you're trying to do here is discover things, but you're also trying to co-opt people to think about government applications, things that could be useful. I think the most important change, aside from the grant size, is taking a percentage of this money to manage the programs within the departments. I mean, you won't want to hear this, but in a lot of these agencies, this is viewed as a congressional tax, and they pay the tax and go back to work. So a lot of this money is not well spent, and it's not managed by the real customers. I mean, the gold standard in the military is the submarine program. The program executive, the guy who builds submarines, owns the SBIR program, and he uses it as a discovery tool and a tool to go and find talent to solve his problems. But in most of the government, it's down in a basement. They publish broad area announcements to the usual suspects and doesn't get acted on. So I think that, you know, taking 2 or 3% so they can put talent around this money and bring it closer to the internal customers is as important as increasing the fund size.
Very good. Mr. Hernandez?
Just make a comment on the size. My father used to have this old saying that too much money makes people lazy. So I'm not an advocate for too much money in these programs. That being said, we're a very capital-intensive industry, at least the biotechnology industry is. We don't believe that the $100,000 is the right size. It doesn't. Again, it takes so much time to write these things, and I'd rather have my scientists focus on other things than a $100,000 effort. So I think the 250 feels right. The 2 million on Phase 2 is definitely, I think, the right number. I would argue that there are other mechanisms that allow one to, for example, fast-track these programs to really combine them so that there's no gap in funding in between Phase 1 and Phase 2. I think that would be a really important element to look at. And again, you got to remember these grants, these fundings, can be used to leverage additional capital, additional private capital. So it really allows us to be able to do that by, again, validating the technology and the approach in some regards. So the number sounds right. I would ask for more, but again, I think we want to make sure we manage it and get really the private sector involved as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we like the size that you all have designated. 250 and 2 million seems appropriate for us. We do believe, though, that the overall monies aggregated here should be larger. And as I said, I suggested 5% of overall R&D we think is appropriate for these smaller companies. We like that 90-day turnaround also. I agree with you. And I think we want to see better data collection as the program goes forward so we're all clear about the steps toward utilization in-state commercialization. And some of that undoubtedly would mean better administration of the agency's programs.
I think the burden of the application, the time it takes to secure the grant award, which often also entails, hiring an outside advisor or consultant to assist with the application, diminishes the value of the grant, and I think that in part has led to the drop-off of the applications, particularly in the medical technology industry that Mr. Leahy referred to.
And if I could just follow up on two comments that were made, I think a 2 to 3% set aside again to help with the administration and really implementation. I think that would help achieve the objective of commercialization, and then also addressing this issue of timing. We actually had our annual meeting here in D.C. Over the past few days, had about 150 CEOs of small medical device companies came in, and chatted with one of them, and they talked about the valley of death even within the SBIR program because the gaps between phase 1 and phase 2, and although there are goals out there in which they're supposed to achieve to respond in time, sometimes there is a significant lag. And so I think some of the timelines in the bill are certainly helpful, but if there's any additional oversight mechanisms that are in place to help ensure that companies aren't sitting on the sidelines waiting for phase 2 grants, would certainly be a welcomed improvement.
I agree. The bill that we're putting forward, or the language that we're submitting, actually allows for fast-track authority within each of the agencies that would basically allow simultaneously for them to issue a phase 1 and a phase 2 grant to the same company or to the same venture. So hopefully that, and I would encourage you to take a look at it and get back to me or the committee if you think there needs to be further improvements, but I think it speaks to the concerns that all of you have raised. Follow up on that, I'm just curious with the venture capital funds, Mr. Hernandez, when your company or similar entrepreneurs are awarded an SBIR grant, to what degree does that help you raise the eyebrow and get the attention of a potential VC fund, or does it not?
Well, there are a couple of things that I would argue, in my experience in raising venture capital, and I've raised venture money from 5 major investment houses, so I've kind of figured out the business a little bit. One of the risks that is assessed beyond the most critical one, which is the management risk, is the technical risk. And oftentimes these venture capitalists are quite savvy and hire the right people to give them perspectives on the validity of that technology or that company. But I would argue that when you have a panel of highly sophisticated scientists that have no dog in the fight, if you would, to vet or give a perspective on the technology via an SBIR funding mechanism, I think that adds immense credibility to the effort. The danger is to ensure that the programs that are pursued are ones that are high risk but still have a market opportunity, and I think that that's been another challenge that needs to be looked at. So I would argue that the technical validation is probably the most important role that these funds play, in addition to just the plain offering of capital to get the company and the venture going.
Very good. Mr. Biddle, do you want to comment on that? Do folks who come forward with an idea and they do or don't have I mean, do you often refer folks to say, hey, you got a great idea, there's this government program out there that might be able to, I mean, obviously 250 grand isn't going to, I'm sure does not compare to the type of investment your organization typically funds, but to what degree does this program interface with what you do?
Well, it does more than the money. As I said before, you can sole source procure from a phase 3 winner, and that's a big deal. I will not back a company that thinks it can compete against Lockheed, period. I mean, for a government-type business, because they can't. So the ability to sole source procure a phase 3 winner is a big deal. And then the ability to collaborate with these scientists with a legal authority to collaborate, because otherwise you can't talk to each other, is a big deal. My fund's different because the world-class science that's in Washington tends to be science that comes out of the intelligence community and DARPA and the DOD. So half my companies are government PhDs who are building commercial companies, and the government doesn't want these guys to go completely native, and they know how the system works, so they will participate in SBIR. But my brethren in Boston and Chicago and Silicon Valley, they just don't deal with the government anymore. So our scientists don't see them, and they don't see the gaps. So it's broken on the information technology side. But the vetting's important. Being close to a customer is important. The way that gap is bridged, is with a customer. And the government, some of the SBIR money belongs to customers, like the PEO of the submarine program. Some of it belongs to academics. There is no customer there. They're not working with a program of record. And that's where the real money is that can build big companies or programs of record. So the SBIR money needs to be closer to the customer, and it needs to have dedicated management focused on discovery, not just publishing broad area announcements. The SBIR program should be more similar to what I do. I don't have on my website, are you a battery company, checkbox, submit plan. I go out, I go to universities, I go to conferences. I'll be at the Navy's SBIR program on Monday. I'm looking for stuff. I scour the country looking for stuff that solves problems that I'm aware of, whether they're government or commercial. And that's what this program should be doing. Because then you'll have the highest value. So you don't want to just fund companies for the sake of funding companies. You want to create wealth. You want to create value. You want to create big companies. And they come from small companies. They are the most innovative, and that is where a disproportionate share of our talent works today. The culture has changed. Working for small companies is now cooler than working for NASA. So, we should exploit that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, in the interest of time and the other members who are here that wish to ask questions, I appreciate all of you for being here and the work that you do, and Mr. Chairman for hosting this committee. I'll yield back.